we get onto the final section, the conclusion of the poem, thinking particularly about how the poet's intentions have changed in the course of the poem. And I think the key thing to bear in mind is this narrative is some form of, I think, an innocence experience narrative. So if we look back at the beginning, we have the event sort of unprocessed, the significance of the event unprocessed. When I was 5 in Louisville, we drove to see nighttime fires, piled 7 of us, all pajamas and running noses, into the Olds, drove fast towards smoke. The key feature of that, of course, is this sort of unusual, unorthodox behaviour. That the child's voice at this moment in time is not showing a kind of understanding of the significance of the oddity of the event that's being undertaken. And so we're looking then for a development in understanding in the conclusion. Charles says, I bent my head back to see where sparks ate up the sky. And here is, I think, a real important moment of epiphany here. This personification that's used to characterize the sparks, I think, shows us here the sky being consumed by destruction. Perhaps a knowledge of all-encompassing rage. Because what we're looking for here is things that are going to allow this child to understand the reasons for their sort of alienated relationship with their father. And this is what follows. My father, who never held us, would take my hand and point to falling cinders that covered the ground like snow. And so, this simile here, after this declaration that it's a father who had never held us, there's a sense of alienation and distance here, and would point to falling cinders that covered the ground like snow. And so here, we have this simile juxtaposing ordinary sort of patriarchal behavior with this unusual exemplification of this. You know, we think of a father explaining the phenomena of snow for the first time to a child, and here we're being given a comparable image, but it is at this moment of absolute rage and pleasure in the destructive act that's unfolding. And what that's doing is giving us actually reasons for the difficulty in the alienation between the speaking child and the father. Who never held us like snow, and point to falling cinders that covered the ground like snow, or excited, show us the swollen collapse of a staircase. And so I think what you see in these lines is various different sound tropes here. Swollen collapse of a staircase. Again, the sibilance is there, and the consonants of the L sound being repeated. I think what you get from this, at least from my perspective, in these different forms of alliteration, is the connotation, I think, of sensory overload and of pleasure. That sinister S links up with the snaked split silent streets in the first stanza and shows us the pleasure that's being found in destruction, and I think gives us a sense of the sinister mental state of the father. Of course, what that then is contrasted with in this final section is the mother. My mother watched my father, not the house. And so in that simple description shows us the orthodox parenting that the child could probably rely on. The mother is simply watching the father and not the house, because it's the father that poses the greater danger rather than the house itself. And so there's this, again, this sense of the family relationship being poised on this moment of destruction and disaster. She was happy only when we were ready to go, when it was finally over and nothing else could burn. And so here we have the normal, simple orthodoxy of the mother's behavior when we were ready to go, when it was finally over. There's a real sense of relief here about the willful imperiling of her children purely to satisfy a kind of a sense of rage and disenfranchisement. And nothing else could burn. I think that the language here, the deliberately vague line here, I think creates a sense of ambiguity. that opens this on to the sense of family being part of what might burn here. There could be a destruction of the family itself and what it what it stands for and how it's constructed. And then we have this very final series of lines, this triplet. Driving home, she would sleep in the front seat as we huddled behind. And so we end with this very final imagery of comfort. She's sleeping in the front seat as we huddled behind. This imagery of comfort and safety. I could see his quiet face in the rearview mirror, eyes like hallways filled with smoke. And this is an extremely powerful image, I think, at the end of this poem. The child is still aware. The child is still awake. Everyone else is asleep. And she uses here this simile to communicate her understanding now of her father's rage. What we see is his eyes, the windows into the soul, are filled with destruction. But importantly, if your eyes are filled with smoke, you can't see clearly. And so this is obscuring his vision. So what we then have is, in the structure of this poem, we have a shift in this final stanza that shows a sense of understanding from the child's perspective, obviously recollected as an adult, that she now understands the difficult relationship she had with her father and why these unusual moments of bonding seemed to produce a type of intimacy, perhaps, that was missing from her ordinary interactions with him. And so what we then have is that shift from naivety and ignorance from the child's perspective of the reasons for a difficult relationship, in that shifting all the way in that final simile to an understanding of both his rage and the reason why his rage and anger perhaps obscured his vision of reality and prevented him from being a kind of orthodox father that maybe could have been relied upon.